Do you believe in flying saucers?
It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
There's other life out there, and there's also intelligent life. That doesn't mean it's easy to find.
It's quite natural to wonder about our place in the universe. To suggest that we're alone is inexcusably egocentric.
The federal government knows fully well what is taking place with regard to the UFO phenomenon, and they're not sharing that with the American people.
I believe that the object that I saw was extraterrestrial.
These objects would hover, they would dart very quickly one way or the other.
I'd never seen anything like that. Haven't since then.
If even one of these sightings is correct, is perhaps the greatest event in all of human history.
Now, earlier today, I spent 3 hours looking through this telescope here. I saw 2 aeroplanes, a couple of birds, some clouds, and a man who looked a bit like my grandma. Normal, everyday things. But I feel a bit left out, because every day, someone somewhere in the world spots something a little bit odd. Now, when I say somewhere in the world, I usually mean America. And when I say something a bit odd, I usually mean a UFO. In fact, more than 80 million Americans, more people than live in the UK, believe that aliens regularly pop down to Earth.
And after a count of about 4 seconds, gone.
And more than 40 million say they've seen or know someone who's seen an alien spaceship.
I have seen alien vehicles on 8 occasions since then.
Many go further and claim they've actually been abducted by aliens.
I find myself floating from my bed.
4 of these beings came into my house, came in and got me.
Even people who haven't been abducted believe that unidentified flying objects are spacecraft guided by intelligent beings from beyond the Earth.
I have no idea. I flashed the light at
Most American believers have probably spent at least a few late nights listening to the radio show which comes live from this attractive desert compound. It's the place to talk about UFOs, or ufology as some call it. The radio station is called Coast to Coast, and sitting in the chair is this man, Art Bell.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hi.
Hey, Art. This is Matt in Colorado.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, got a sighting for you that happened last summer.
Oh?
It was huge, a cigar-shaped.
The common cause of ufology is to finally determine what in the hell is flying in our skies.
It hurt your eyes, so I turned away. When I looked back, it was gone.
I think that Coast to Coast AM is the main conduit for ufology information. And over my phone lines have come the most informed ufologists, the best scientists, and some of the craziest people you'll ever meet.
3 points of light. The weird thing about them.
Coast to Coast, somewhat inevitably, became one of the most popular shows on American radio.
It was really weird.
Like they were doing a dance?
Yeah, exactly. And they went over the rooftop.
I think we're fascinated with the whole concept of alien intelligence because it would be so strange if we were all alone. Imagine for a moment how it would feel if we were all alone, if there was no other life, intelligent life, anywhere in all that you see out there.
Art Bell and his little wife Ramona say they encountered something from out there in 1994.
We were on the way home from Las Vegas, about a half mile from where we're standing at the moment.
I just happened to look out the rear view mirror and just saw something coming up from behind us.
And this thing floated above our heads, doing about 30 miles an hour.
That's a good word, float. Yeah.
Floated, yeah, it floated. Or defied, had to have been defying gravity, or it was a lighter than aircraft. I don't know. But it was triangular, it was monstrous. The moon and the stars went away, and there it was above us. And we stood and watched it go across the valley and head toward the mountains.
UFO sightings like this are greeted with skepticism by most, but it's harder to be skeptical when there are hundreds, even thousands of eyewitnesses. like in Phoenix, Arizona, on March the 13th, 1997.
There were some incredible sightings over Phoenix called the Phoenix Lights, and they occurred while I was doing my program. I took call after call after call of people in Phoenix saying, "Oh my God, what's flying over our city?"
At 8:30 p.m. that night, hundreds of people reported seeing a mysterious flying thing. Security guard Bob Nelson was sitting on his porch with his dog.
All at once, these 6 or 7 lights came across the top of the hill, and it was moving very slow. And then I went in and jokingly said to my wife, "We got a UFO coming over." She just couldn't believe what she seen. And of course, she didn't know what she seen.
Sue Watson and her children, Brian, Erin, and Kevin, were in their front yard.
We saw this incredible sized vehicle. There were 5 huge lights in the very front of it, and it was in a boomerang shape. I'm only 1.5 miles from that mountain, the top of that mountain. That vehicle spent 5 to 6 minutes hovering from that mountain to my house. I don't know anything that can go that slow.
Sheriff's Deputy Thomas Chavez was in his squad car.
I was sitting here facing to the east, watching the intersection. And on one of the times when I glanced up from my paperwork, that's when I saw the strange set of lights. I can't give you a definite answer as to what it was. All I can tell you of what it was not, and it was definitely not an aircraft as we know it.
Mike Fortson grabbed his binoculars, and then his wife.
As it passed in front of us, all we could see was the left wing of the craft itself. That's how low it was. We didn't go fetch a camera. We didn't do anything but sit there and watch it. You actually tell yourself not to blink because you might miss something. I mean, that's how intense it was. It gives me goosebumps when I talk about it.
Then, at 10 p.m. that night, thousands of other people reported seeing yet another series of lights in the sky.
What I'm looking at here is a light on South Mountain.
Mike Christen taped them from his house on the brilliantly named Moon Mountain.
When I saw the one light, it was one thing. I was just photographing the one light, and then all of a sudden another one popped up in a different direction. So then I trained the camera on that light, and then another one popped up, and before you know it, this whole thing is starting to happen in front of my eyes, and I'm going, wait, this is something.
All right, you tell me what it is.
James Magahay lives in Tucson, Arizona, south of Phoenix. He's a retired Air Force pilot and an astronomer, and he thinks UFOs are all perfectly explicable.
What most people see is lights in the sky at night, points of light. They equate that to spacecraft from another world. There's no connection. If you see a light in the sky, you've seen a light in the sky. That's all you've seen. This happened in the case of the Phoenix lights. The lights on the videotape were simply flares being dropped by A-10s on the Goldwater test range. They were connecting the dots of these objects, so saying it's all one thing. It wasn't one thing. It was 5 different aircraft flying in formation.
Not so, say those who saw the lights.
For somebody to say there were planes in formation, I'm telling them I saw a solid object.
I am so certain of what I saw that I would testify in a court of law or in a congressional hearing.
I think it was a UFO. I honestly believe that there was a UFO.
These people are not alone. There are many, many others. This is the Center for UFO Studies on the outskirts of Chicago. There are files here from thousands of UFO witnesses and records that go back for decades. Dr. Mark Rodiga has been researching the UFO phenomenon non-stop since 1974.
One conjecture is that many reports, or at least a good fraction of reports these days, are caused by secret aircraft. It turns out that it's actually pretty easy to distinguish between sightings that might be secret aircraft and sightings that are probably not that. When you get a UFO sighting where the object behaves in a way that defies conventional physics, defies the way that an airplane would move. And when you can see the object, it's not just a point of light, and that thing isn't shaped like an airplane, well, then it's not a secret aircraft. It's whatever it is, it's just something totally bizarre and strange.
In the middle of one night in January 2000, Melvin Knoll was driving his truck near St. Louis when he saw something bizarre and strange. It was a huge triangular object in the sky. He drove his truck to the Highland, Illinois Police Department to report an unidentified flying object heading towards the neighboring town of Lebanon.
Lebanon just received a call from Highland PD. Reference to a truck driver just stopped in and said there was a flying object in the area of Lebanon.
It's a joke, right?
No, this is not a joke.
10-4 now.
Ed Barton was the first police officer to respond to the call.
To be advised, there's a very bright white light east of town, and it keeps changing colors. It's heading westbound now. Matter of fact, if the shadow officer looks up, they can probably see it by now. 2550. I see something, but I don't know what the heck it is.
At 4:23 a.m., police officer David Martin saw the UFO over a field on the outskirts of Shiloh.
I happened to look over and saw this large floating object that was just moving very slowly. It was probably about a football field in length. It had 3 large bright lights lighting up the sky underneath it. I honestly don't know what it was that I saw, other than I know it wasn't a plane or a helicopter.
Police reported the object over Lebanon, then over Shiloh, over Millstadt, over Dupo. Detective Mark Lopino says he saw it as it approached O'Fallon, Illinois.
I first thought it was probably a bunch of helicopters flying in some type of formation. As I drew closer to it, I saw it start to cross over the roadway. It was unlike anything I have ever seen before. You could see the lights, and you could see something that they were attached to, and it was shaped like a triangle. I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the heck is this? So I continue, and it's going over these trees. By the time I get here toward the left turn lane, I duck into this left turn lane here, and I stop right about here. I wanted to listen to see if I could hear any type of engine noise. I could not hear anything. I tried to look again at the UFO, and it had already gone behind these trees. I put it in reverse to back up a couple seconds to see if I could reacquire it again. By the time I backed up and tried to see it, it had moved at least a mile away, if not further. That quick. I was just astonished. I didn't know what to say. I was speechless.
In all, 6 people saw something a little bit odd that night. Now, 5 of them were policemen. They weren't drunk, they weren't on drugs, they weren't self-deluded. Each of them saw a huge triangular object flying over them in total silence. But what was it? Could it have been extraterrestrial? The claim that any unidentified flying object must be from another planet isn't a new one. And I'll tell you more about that after this break.
I was fairly sure that I was looking at an alien spaceship.
He says, well, now it's coming at us.
It was absolutely crazy.
This line here is the Greenwich Meridian, which means that right now I'm standing at the very centre of the Earth. Now, you'd think this would be an obvious place for aliens to come and land, but I've lived half a mile away from here for the last 5 years. I've never even seen one. For some reason, aliens prefer America. And it was 5,000 miles away from this spot in Washington State that a man named Kenneth Arnold saw the first ever flying saucer. On Tuesday of June 24th, 1947, while he was piloting his tiny light aircraft, he saw 9 dish-shaped objects flying at some considerable speed over Mount Rainier.
Every newspaper across the nation has made headlines out of it, and this afternoon we are honored indeed to have here in our studio Kenneth Arnold, who we believe may be able to give us a first-hand account and give you the same on what happened. Go ahead, Kenneth.
They looked something like a pie plate that was cut in half with a sort of a convex triangle in the rear. I'd be glad to confirm it with my hands on a Bible because I did see it, It's just as much a mystery to me as it is to everyone else who's been calling me the last 24 hours wondering what it was.
The press, always keen on a quirky catchphrase, quickly named them flying saucers.
Arnold's sighting just seemed to catalyze everything. All of a sudden, there was this presence of something unidentified in the sky that couldn't be ignored. And in the next 2 or 3 weeks, there were many hundreds of sightings.
Army fighter planes are on patrol for flying saucers. Cameras installed.
So many flying objects were suddenly being seen by so many people that the US Army Air Force launched an official investigation.
They're seeing flying saucers everywhere.
And on September 23rd, 1947, General Nathan Twining issued a stern memo that said, once and for all, the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. It was the beginning of the Cold War. America was obsessed by the prospect of its security being breached by the fiendish Russians.
We didn't know what they might have flying. And so those concerns by the government, legitimate concerns by the government for our security, led eventually to them establishing a full-time office to investigate UFOs.
The US Air Force investigators quickly came to realize that they were not dealing with Soviet aircraft, not unless the Soviets had developed impossible technology. And then, on July 24th, 1948, 2 experienced commercial pilots, Clarence Childs and John Whitted, were flying at night over Alabama when they encountered another UFO, a cigar-shaped object perhaps 100 feet long, flying faster than any aircraft they'd ever seen. It had, they said, 2 rows of windows, and they could see lights inside and orange-red flames shooting out of the tail. The Air Force investigators trusted the testimony of these experienced pilots and were forced to consider the incredible. Since 1948, there have been thousands of sightings by both commercial and military flight crews.
Out of nowhere, some lights appeared, looking over to the left of me, just to the north of me.
I noticed a red light of some kind to the far, the distance off our port side, our right side.
And Larry says, well, keep an eye on it. He says, well, now it's coming at us. So.
And they began to turn from pointing directly at us in an echelon sort of a turn away. It was not a plane, it was not a weather balloon. It was huge, absolutely huge. It was dark red color. And so this object began to become transparent and it disappeared. It was absolutely crazy. Crazy.
It just was gliding through the sky so quietly, and as it did so, it blotted out the stars behind it. And it just reminded me of a submarine in the depths when it's quiet and just kind of motoring right on through, you know.
I watched this big, gigantic light go out behind our left wingtip, and then as the turn progressed, it disappeared in the distance off to the back at a very high rate of speed. I've flown all the jets. I flew in the war. I flew B-17s in the war. Everything. I've got over 30,000 hours of flight time and never had a sighting as that one. So it was once in a lifetime.
In the autumn of 1948, US Air Force investigators were convinced by the testimony of pilots. In a remarkable top-secret report, the investigators said the Earth was definitely being visited by alien spaceships. But the eyewitness accounts from experienced pilots didn't convince Air Force Chief of Staff General Hoyt Vandenberg. The general thought the report was nonsense and the pilots were oddballs. The Air Force just wanted flying saucers to go back to wherever they came from, but the public's fascination with UFOs was growing. In 1952, the Air Force received more UFO reports than any other year in history.
The sky is the stage, the actors, so-called flying saucers. And they're back on the scene with some new twists.
This is a photograph of a flying saucer taken by myself and it reminded me of two straw hats stuck together at the brim.
I saw an intensely bright, white-green object in the sky. Now, I wouldn't want to say that this was one of those so-called flying saucers, but whatever it was an object and not an illusion.
The Air Force had really tried to downplay the UFO problem. But by the summer of 1952, there was an enormous wave of sightings. There were hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of sightings. Most alarmingly, the sightings were focused on Washington, D.C. At least 3 radar systems in Washington and the area were picking up unidentified targets.
In July 1952, the Pentagon's phone lines were jammed with calls about UFOs.
The number of calls of frightened Americans, hysterical Americans coming into the switchboards of the American government were clogging communication channels. And if American communication channels were clogged, then this would leave America vulnerable to a potential Soviet attack.
President Truman ordered the CIA to make recommendations on how the Air Force should handle the UFO problem. The CIA convened a panel headed by the physicist H.P. Robertson.
The Robertson panel says we must do something to remove the aura of mystery from the UFO phenomena so that people no longer take them seriously and don't bother to report them. That's what we want.
So, flying saucers, whatever they were, wherever they came from, were to be made the subject of ridicule. But it was impossible to control the public interest. People were fascinated. One of the most widely read magazines of the time proclaimed the flying saucers are real. And one of the most respected publications in America, Life magazine, published photographs.
Just a minute, ladies and gentlemen, I think something is happening.
The day the Earth stood still.
This could be the beginning of the end for the human race.
The War of the Worlds.
The meteors, or the often ridiculed flying saucers, are in reality the flaming vanguard of the invasion from Mars.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London, Paris, the whole world is under attack. Can it survive?
The US government just couldn't control the public's appetite for something so exciting. But the US Air Force would spend 22 years trying to do just that with a special project called Blue Book. During the 1950s and 60s, from its Ohio headquarters, Project Blue Book investigated hundreds of UFO reports every year. The reports came from all over the USA. People were desperate to find out what it was they'd seen in the sky. Project Blue Book was overwhelmed by the sheer number of reports.
Blue Book was tasked with a public relations mission, and that mission was denounce the UFOs, dismiss the UFOs, debunk the UFOs, and anybody who believes in them. Just come up with answers and get this UFO thing out of the newspapers.
And that job was most often left to Blue Book's one civilian scientist, Ohio State astronomer Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
At this time, there is no proof that I would consider valid scientific proof that we have been visited by spaceships.
There was not one sound. I listened. There was not a sound.
Between 1948 and 1969, bearded Dr. Hynek was Project Blue Book's chief scientific investigator on thousands of cases. His forensic mind searched for ways to explain the strangest phenomena. In the middle of the Cold War, across remote stretches of the northern United States, the Air Force kept ballistic missiles and B-52 bombers on constant alert. On the night of October the 24th, 1968, at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, Airman First Class Mike O'Connor was sent off to fix something at one of the missile sites.
We made our turn to come down the road to the missile site, and out of the corner of my eye, I observed what I thought was a farmer's yard light, but it looked awful bright. As we proceeded down the road, the object
appeared to lift off the ground and parallel us down the road until we came to the missile site, at which point we got out of the truck and it just kind of hovered there.
Staff Sergeant Bill Smith was in charge of making sure 10 nuclear missiles didn't go missing. That night, he reported seeing strange objects.
These objects would rise, they would speed up, they would slow it down, they would hover, they would dart very quickly one way or the other. We were just not really sure that these were things that we could explain.
The Minot control tower diverted a B-52 to investigate. Captain Brad Runyon was the B-52's co-pilot.
I was curious, and I said, well, what are we looking for? And they said, well, you'll know it if you find it.
The navigator on the B-52, Captain Patrick McCaslin, suddenly saw something on his radar screen.
I saw a return, faint one sweep, bright the next, large, off our right wing, 3 o'clock, at about 3 miles. And at that point, I asked the radar navigator to turn on the camera, which would then take pictures of whatever was on the radar screen.
These pictures of the radar screen show the object flying in formation with the B-52.
This thing was climbing out with us and maintaining the same heading we were. That was unusual. But what really watered my eyes when this thing backed away and allowed us to turn inside of it.
When the object suddenly disappeared from the radar screen, the bomber turned around to try and spot it visually. Runyon was the first to spot what appeared to be a glowing craft hovering near the ground.
My estimate, overall object was a minimum of 200 feet in diameter, and it was hundreds of feet long. It had a metallic cylinder attached to another section that was shaped like a crescent moon. I felt that this crescent moon part was probably the command center. I tried to look inside the thing, but all I could see was a yellow glow. At that point, I was fairly sure that I was looking at an alien spaceship, something that had come here from some other planet other than Earth.
Co-pilot Runyon and all the other crew members of the B-52 reported their sighting when they returned to base. According to Blue Book's investigation, the crew of the B-52 and 16 independent witnesses on the ground said they saw a UFO that night. In its final report, Blue Book decided that they'd all seen stars.
It bothers me that Blue Book blew it off. I don't think this incident has ever been adequately explained.
The US Air Force finally got out of the business of trying to explain UFOs in 1969. It closed down Project Blue Book after an independent commission concluded that UFOs were of no scientific interest. But there was one loud voice in disagreement. It was Blue Book's once skeptical chief scientist, Alan Hynek. After more than 20 years and more than 12,000 UFO investigations, Dr. Hynek had become a believer.
In Blue Book, for instance, we would get reports from military pilots, and that was particularly embarrassing to the Air Force because after they had trained those men, and they couldn't very well, they could say that a civilian pilot might have been untrustworthy, but they could hardly say that to of their own military pilots, and we got case after case after case from military pilots which never hit the press.
For many of those who believe that the Earth has been visited by alien spaceships, this remote New Mexico ranch is a kind of mecca.
Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer at the Army Air Base in Roswell, receives a telephone call. The call is to go to the ranch of Mac Brazel and investigate some material that Brazel has found on his land. And this stuff was extraordinary. Jesse Marcel was absolutely convinced what he found was extraterrestrial, that the debris was nothing of this Earth.
Jesse Marcel Sr. took the debris to the Army Air Force Base at Roswell early in the morning of July the 8th. And by noon, the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, authorized a press release saying that what Marcel had found was definitely the remains of a flying saucer.
The next day, there was a press conference organized by General Roger Ramey. And Roger Ramey says, "We did not recover a flying saucer. This is no flying disc. What we recovered was a weather balloon."
The top brass popped Marcel's balloon. The papers rubbished the UFO story, and that was an end to the matter. For 30 years, no one paid any attention to the events at Roswell. Jesse Marcel's story of a flying saucer that crashed might still be forgotten, were it not for a ufologist named Stanton Friedman.
I got involved in 1978. I was at a television station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The station manager, out of the blue, he says, "You know, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. He handled the wreckage of one of those saucers you were interested in when he was in the military." What?
Stanton Friedman found Jesse Marcel. He'd retired from the military and was living quietly in Houma, Louisiana. But Jesse Marcel had a story to tell.
What I saw, I couldn't believe there was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. We found a piece of metal about a 1.5 to 2 feet wide. You couldn't even bend it. You couldn't, even with a sledgehammer, would bounce off of it. So it was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
So what's the truth? The wreckage hadn't been seen since 1947, so there was no way to prove Jesse Marcel's claims. But this didn't stop Stanton Friedman and his fellow fans of Roswell. The first Roswell book appeared in 1980. It said that what crashed was a flying saucer. It said there was no evidence because the US government was hiding it somewhere. The government was engaged in a massive UFO cover-up. A host of new witnesses suddenly came out of the woodwork to share the limelight with tales of secret government activity and even alien bodies found in the wreckage.
The small nose, eyes like this.
Extraterrestrials were found in Roswell?
Yes.
Dead?
Dead extraterrestrials were found, no question about it.
This is an incredible story. Aliens, the federal government, intimidation, we have a bestseller on our hands.
In 1995, an American television station broadcast what they promoted as recently discovered film of an alien autopsy performed at Roswell. It was watched by more than 20 million viewers. Decades after something fell from the sky outside Roswell, tourist money started raining onto this remote New Mexico town. It didn't matter that there was absolutely no evidence to support the claim that a flying saucer crashed here. It didn't matter that there were no credible witnesses to alien bodies. On the 50th anniversary of the alleged crash, 65% of Americans told a Time magazine CNN poll that they believed the story. The US Air Force offered its version of events in 2 reports called The Roswell Incident and Case Solved.
We're confident once the report is out and digested by the public that this will be the final word on the Roswell incident. The conclusion of the first report left no doubt that what was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947 was debris from a formerly top-secret Army Air Forces research project, codenamed Mogul.
Project Mogul was so secret it had the same security classification as the Manhattan Project, the program to build the first atomic bomb. These high-altitude balloons with their instrumentation were designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. They were tremendous in size, as long as 650 feet. And in 1947, nothing else on Earth looked like this.
When I began to look at the reports from that project and see the kinds of materials that were used, and then I took a look at the descriptions of the genuine debris that was found, it all matched. It all fit. So the irony of all of this is that the great Roswell mystery, the great Roswell cover-up, arose from a real cover-up, but the intent was not to protect knowledge of a crash flying saucer, but to protect a very earthly project.
Is that one there? That thing? Millennium Dome. Right. Now, the people that tell us that aliens walk amongst us also tell us why. Some say it's to study us, some say it's to protect us, and some say it's to take us away in big spaceships and experiment on us in the sky. We'll look at the world of alien abduction when we come back.
It put its hand out, and I put my hand out.
A being that was so horrifying that I'll never be able to, put it out of my memory.
Sort of a chalky skin.
I don't even know how to say this. He started to put my legs apart.
Now, over there is Westminster, home to the Prime Minister and all his many friends. Now, you'd think if you were an alien, that'd be a pretty obvious place to land and say, take me to your leader. But it seems aliens aren't interested in politicians or world leaders. They much prefer farmers or women who work in offices, because there are now tens of thousands of ordinary people who truly believe they've been abducted by aliens.
I had gone down to bed that night when 4 of these beings came into my house, and I was still awake, laying down in my bed. I really, literally thought I was going to die. I was taken on the craft. I was brought to some very contained room. I can't talk about what was done there because it's too personal.
Many of these abduction memories are recalled through hypnosis.
They're in my room.
They're in the room.
The 2 are on my left.
2 on the left?
Yeah, they're with me again. They're on my left.
They're there.
Bud Hopkins is an artist who's spent the last 25 years exploring his belief that aliens are not only here, but that they're kidnapping us too.
And what do they look like?
4 foot tall, 4.5 foot tall.
Hopkins records story after story of people being taken onto spaceships and then returned to Earth with their memory clouded or erased.
I can't even move. I can't even move. I'm trying to.
Hypnosis has been extremely useful. When the person is physically relaxed, some of the static can be cleared away and the person has a clear recollection of what happened. You're in bed. 1, this is a long time ago. We're just going to see what it was. 2, right on the edge. 3.
He's looking at me very closely. I'm saying he, but I don't know, it feels like a he.
One of the things, of course, that caught my attention from the very beginning was the similarity of these cases and the details that were coming up over and over again.
Through hypnotic regression, I came to realize that there was a spaceship maybe 100 feet in the air off to the left of front of my house, and an alien came in, was next to my bed.
It put its hand out, and I put my hand out. Sort of a chalky skin, very dry to the touch.
5, you're starting to wake up. 4, waking up.
This kind of hypnotic technique is generally frowned upon by scientists.
There is no evidence that hypnosis will help you retrieve memories, or if it does retrieve memories, that the memories that get retrieved are in fact accurate.
Dr. Susan Clancy and other research psychologists at Harvard University who've worked with the abductees think their abduction experience actually comes from not enough cocoa at bedtime.
What happens in one of these episodes is that a person is emerging from rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep, the stage of sleep when we do most of our dreaming. When we are in REM sleep, our entire body is paralyzed. It's probably a good thing, otherwise we'd act out our dreams. But in one of these episodes, what happens is that the person's eyes can open, they can see their bedroom, they're awake, they're conscious, and they're also aware that they're totally paralyzed. And suddenly they feel tingling sensations coursing through their body. They'll see lights flashing, sounds buzzing, and feel a sense of presence in the bedroom. If you don't know what this is, it can be a very frightening experience. These sorts of episodes have been reported throughout history and throughout cultures. The incubi, the succubi, the demons that used to visit people in the Middle Ages. But in our subjects, these visitors in the bedroom are interpreted as aliens. And finally, these individuals, our subjects, will often go to hypnotherapists, often who believe in such things, and will then hypnotize them and do so-called regression sessions, where they'll take the person back to the moment where they were paralyzed in bed and try to find out what happened next. At that point, you get these quote-unquote memories emerging of being taken out of the bedroom, through the window, up into a spaceship, being experimented upon by these alien beings, participating in hybrid breeding and all sorts of other exotic adventures. And so at this point, you've got yourself an alien abductee.
They brought me in front of a being that was so horrifying that I'll never be able to, put it out of my memory. It was very tall, probably about 7 foot tall.
Very tall and very thin and very scary, and sometimes
insect.
almost like an insect, very frightening to me.
And I found myself in this room, and I was lying on this stretcher, and this being, I don't even know how to say this, he started to put my legs apart.
They put like a jock strap on you of some sort with a tube attached to it, and it runs to a machine, and they somehow extract sperm. I don't know how they do it.
And this female brought a baby, and she sort of handed him to me. And I instantly said, this baby is mine. I know he's mine. She pulled the baby away from me and said, no, this baby is ours.
Personal experience, though, isn't enough to convince the scientists.
I don't care how many people say they've seen something. As a scientist, I need something better than your eyewitness testimony, because even if in the court of law, eyewitness testimony is a high form of evidence, in the court of science, it is the lowest form of evidence you could possibly put forth.
Many scientists believe that somewhere among the billions of stars in our galaxy, or in the billions of other galaxies in the universe, there could well be other planets just like Earth, where life exists. They say that what created Earth and mankind must have created life somewhere else in the vastness of space. Somewhere there could be another developed civilization, maybe looking for us. Dr. Frank Drake has been listening intently for that civilization for 45 years. His ears must hurt. It was 1960 in Greenbank, West Virginia, when Drake first pointed a radio telescope at a nearby star and listened.
We just had this feeling that something very important was starting, that this was a new road that human beings were taking that was going to lead to very wonderful places and very wonderful things for our civilization.
Dr. Drake's experiment marked the beginning of a project called SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Of course, if that intelligence is out there, to them, we're the aliens. Dr. Seth Shostak is an astronomer who works with Drake at the SETI Institute.
We've been broadcasting our existence to the universe for the last 50 or 60 years, and we've been doing that with our high-powered radio and television transmissions. Every day, those signals just go right on out into space. That's how we're broadcasting into space, and we kind of turn that idea around when we try and find the extraterrestrials by trying to find their broadcasts.
Dr. Drake remembers the day of his first search in April 1960 very clearly.
For all we knew, every star in the sky had a radio transmitting civilization. We might succeed the first day. And so we pointed at the first star, and when it finally set in the west, we moved over and pointed the telescope at the second star. And we heard on a loudspeaker a signal, like we'd never heard before with a radio telescope. And it was a lot like a lot of people said we might detect, a series of pulses. It sounded like choo, 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 choo. All our hearts were pounding. You think this may be one of the greatest moments in history unfolding right here before us.
Unfortunately, the signal turned out to be nothing more than the sound of a nearby plane. But that wasn't going to spoil things for Dr. Drake.
When you detect such a signal, and it truly looks to be extraterrestrial, it's a very special emotion. I'd like to feel it again.
For scientists, seeing things is not enough. For them, only physical evidence will prove that UFOs are visiting Earth. But they do believe that life exists beyond Earth, and they've spent decades searching for the first piece of evidence. A spacecraft launched by NASA and the European Space Agency travelled billions of miles, and in January 2005 landed a probe on Saturn's moon, Titan. No human spacecraft has ever landed so far from Earth. These images of Titan's surface suggest an active world of rivers and oceans, and scientists believe that where there is liquid, there may be life. While you think that the scientists and the UFO believers would be on opposite sides of the fence, there is one thing that absolutely unites them. They all dream of the day there's actual, provable contact with extraterrestrials. And for all we know, that day may come. Until it does, we'll just have to keep on looking.
Tomorrow at 9.
2.5 hours after I found my parents, they had me arrested.
The stories of innocent men on death row in escaping execution. And next here on Sky One.
Most notorious gang I've heard of are the poverty-driven children.
Ross Kemp on gangs goes to London.